PlayStation 4 that we are changing the HDMI port on. Let's take a look. Now the pins, for the most part, they look good except for the first 3 pins or the second and third pin. We see some damage there. That's not the only problem. If we look at the pins on the HDMI port, we see a lot of damage on to the port. What I'm going to do is start by applying low melt solder onto the 4 legs of the connector, and then we're going to apply low melt solder onto the front pins of the connector, and by doing so we lower the melting temperature of the connector. We can use a little bit of hot air to remove that connector. Now if we did not apply low melt solder onto the connector, then it takes a lot of heat to remove that connector from the board, because remember, if we use hot air only without using low melt solder, then it's going to take a lot of heat to remove that connector. The board is going to absorb the heat, and when the board itself and the pads on the board reach melting temperature, that's when we will be able to pull that connector off. So we do not want to expose the board to a lot of heat, and that's why we apply low melt solder. Low melt solder melts at very low temperature. When mixed with unleaded solder that's on the board that melts at very high temperature, they create a mixture that will melt at a much lower temperature than what it would take to melt unleaded solder. So what we're going to do is we're going to use low melt solder and start by doing the legs of the connector from the back. When we do that, then we do the front, and by doing so we will use a little bit of hot air to remove that connector off the board. So let's start with the back, and
I'll leave it with you. No point in turning it on because it takes like 5 minutes before it even says.
Let's go ahead and apply low melt solder on the back legs of the connector. I'm also applying some heat from the hot air station. I want a good mixture of low melt solder and unleaded solder. I know from experience that unleaded solder on PS4 boards takes a lot of heat to melt. Soldering iron is currently at 400 degrees. We want to have a good mixture of low melt and unleaded, and in order for that to happen, we need to be able to melt the unleaded solder that's on the board by applying a good amount of heat, not from the hot air but from the soldering iron, but we can give it some help from the hot air station. I currently have it at 200 degrees Celsius. Okay. 200 degree cannot melt anything on the board, but because we have the soldering iron on the leg, the hot air will just give it an extra push. Okay, that should be good enough. And then finally this one here. And the leg is already moving. Okay, so we have enough low melt solder on the legs, and we have a pretty good mixture of low melt and unleaded. Let's go ahead and do the front. Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay, so the pins are already moving. I'm just making sure all the pins are getting enough dose of low melt solder. So let's go ahead and use hot air to remove that connector. And the connector is out. Do not wick sideways. So the wicking motion is up and down. We do not wick sideways, so we don't rip off any pads. So everything's perfect.
Hi.
Hey buddy, how are you? John, right?
Yes.
How's everything?
So,
Oh, it's I put it back in.
So what's going
can
on?
you open this real quick so we can discuss
It's
this?
this
Really,
one.
I mean, this one, so we can just discuss
Okay.
it.
This should be the HDMI for the PS4.
Drop it.
Same one? Alright, just give me a
What time you
sec.
guys close?
6,
Okay, I can make it back by 5:30.
actually. 5:30 would be perfect. Yeah, once the glass breaks on that one, you cannot take pictures anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'm gonna have it upgrade.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is apply some solder onto a few pins in the front so we can secure this connector in place. Let's do that by pressing on the connector. We want to press down to make sure that the connector is making a flat connection with the pads, like so. Be right there. Okay, so that should be enough. One moment. Hey man, how are you?
So I called yesterday in regards to getting this fixed.
Oh, which one? Now that we have the connector, some of the pins soldered onto the pads, one thing that we do not do for sure is apply a lot of heat onto the board, so we do not warp the board or damage the board, or, so we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or damage the board. So we do not warp the board or dam damage other components on the board. We do not do that, and that's why we use the low melt solder. And that's it, the back is done. Very good. So let's go back to the front and finish off soldering the front pins. Okay, so we have a perfect amount of solder on there. I do not need to apply anymore. I can just spread that solder onto the pins.
Do you guys sell like repair replacement parts?
We do not.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Do we sell, repair, replacement parts? We do not. Because the person is going to come and buy it, he's going to damage it, and then he's going to come back to you and say, oh, the part that you gave me is not working. You gave him a perfectly working part, but because of his lack of experience, he damages the part, and then he comes back to you. Like a lady came in and she wanted a tempered glass for her iPad. So I told her, okay, we can do it for you here. She said, no, if you can save me money, I'll do it on my own. So she bought 2 of them. She went home and she tried to do it and she failed. She came the next day and she complained about having dust under the tempered glass. Having a business is a learning experience. You keep modifying the rules, adding new rules. People will always find ways, will always find backdoors, trying to get a free repair or trying to get something free. If you have it written down in your policy, then you will not have any issues in the future. The job is done. Let me go ahead and test to make sure the pins are solid. Very good. Very good. Everything is perfect. This one is just bothering me, pin number 1. That's it. That's it. The board is done. Everything is good. Customer is coming to pick up in maybe half an hour. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like always, go ahead and like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.